And joining us now from Belfast is Ciaran Browne. He's an Associate Professor of Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation at Trinity College Dublin. Very good to have you here on the programme. You recently wrote a book about the situation in Palestine, arguing that transitional justice is part of a deeply flawed peace-building process. What do you mean by that?
Well, thanks as always for the invitation to join you. I mean, let's look at the situation on the ground. We've seen all of these attempted peace-building efforts in the region. We've seen how deeply flawed they've been. And transitional justice, as I argued in that book, is part of that apparatus. It's part of that control. It's part of that way of keeping Palestinians appeased and not actually pushing forward for any justice-oriented solutions to what has been obviously it's over 75 years of conflict. I mean, if there was ever going to be any sort of meaningful justice in Palestine, you would see Palestinian refugees being allowed to return to Palestine. You would see war criminals being held to account at The Hague. You would see all of what we have seen over the last 22 months of absolute carnage, people being held accountable for that. So, I mean, it's very clear what we're seeing here is international law itself being ripped up before our very eyes. You're seeing over 2 million people face extreme food insecurity and starvation. I mean, your reports out of Gaza for the last 2 years have been devastating, but they have reached unimaginable depths of sheer horror that we're seeing these pictures. This is absolutely scandalous, and the world is being gaslit on an industrial scale, let me add, on an industrial scale into thinking that America is doing all it can to get a resolution, or that European leaders are doing all they can to bring about some kind of solution here. That is not the case. We are being absolutely led down the garden path on this. It's very clear that this is a European and Western and American sponsored genocide of the Palestinian people. And if there's ever going to be any justice, meaningful justice, you will see those responsible dragged before The Hague and held accountable.
But isn't transitional justice about the victims and their rights and dignity?
Allegedly. It's only about victims and their dignity if it actually works, if it's actually brought to bear, if it's actually seen to have some kind of tangible results. I mean, we don't have the time here to go into the details of the book, really, in a lot of detail here. At the end of the day, what we have, as I said, is 2 million people being starved to death in Gaza. We can worry about the transitional justice issues later on down the road. What we need here now is meaningful intervention, humanitarian intervention. We can worry about the rest, as I say, later on down the road. So that's what we need to keep our eyes on. We need to keep very focused and very determined on bringing this horrible conflict, this horrible genocide to a close, holding the Israeli government to account for what they have been allowed to do, holding their partners in crime to account, including the UK government, including European partners, including the United States, and making sure that this never is allowed to happen again. Otherwise, this is something that will be happening globally on repeat in other spaces. We've been told this by experts around the world.
So you're claiming that this is a Western and European-sponsored genocide. Does that mean that these peace talks are doomed to fail?
Well, tell me when there was ever a successful peace talk in the Middle East with regards to the situation in Palestine. Tell me when that ever happened. There have never been successful peace talks. What you have here, again, as I've said from the very beginning, is the Americans trying to save face by sending Steve Witkoff, who must have the most amount of air miles of any diplomat in the world, sending Steve Witkoff to go over to Rome to be seen to be doing something, to try and give global citizens the sense that America cares about the situation. I mean, that's one of the other tragedies in all of this. Not only is the tragedy of what's happening in Gaza, there's the tragedy of the fact that millions of people around the world, let's never lose sight of this, millions of people around the world are witnessing their governments doing actions that they completely disagree with. So I don't have any hope in these talks. I don't have any hope whatsoever. I think unless there is meaningful action, unless the United States turn off the tap, stop funding the genocide, stop arming the Israelis, the UK the same, unless we start to see meaningful, tangible action, unless we start seeing sanctions, boycott, divestment, all of the tools that we've been screaming about for the best part of 2 years, unless we see them implemented, this is all a face-saving exercise. And I have no hope whatsoever. And I don't say that lightly, because I speak to my friends who have their family members in Deir al-Balah, in Gaza City, in Shujaia. It gives me no joy whatsoever to reach that conclusion, but I have no hope in this situation bringing about a resolution unless there is meaningful action. And that is what we need to see. And it's not just me saying that. We've heard the Special Rapporteur say that. We have heard Francesca Albanese talk about this. This is the UN-appointed Special Rapporteur for the situation in Palestine. She has called on governments around the world to engage in meaningful action. That involves holding the Israeli state to account, ostracizing it, not affording it political inoculation and protection by allowing it to get on with what it has been able to do. I mean, which country in the last 3 weeks has attacked 4 capital cities in the Middle East? Israel. So this has to stop. This has to change. And the only way to bring about change is to bring about action, not these junket trips where people come together and make no progress whatsoever. I have no hope in that whatsoever.
Professor Browne, thank you so much for your time here on TRT World.